Okay, I think we're going to start. Welcome everyone to Lake Washington School District's Career Panel Series. Today we are going to take a look at biotechnology, and we have two professionals who work in the field. And so I think what I will do is I'll go and introduce them to you, and then they will share with you about their education, career pathways, and advice for you. So first we have Pauline Fusco. She works at Access to Advanced Health Institute, which is located right in South Lake Union in Seattle. And we have Joanne Kane. She works at Norbitus. We're lucky to have Joanne with us. She's actually on a holiday break right now. She works and lives in Switzerland. So yeah, so go ahead. You can go ahead and just start and share your story with us.
Just to be clear, I am the non-traditional panelist on this forum. I started out with my degree in civil and environmental engineering, and I worked doing high Arctic contaminated sites remediation and site assessments, a couple like commercial building energy audits, that kind of thing. So I started out in a field that didn't have anything to do with biology. And then, because I was young and I was restless and I was born in a very small town, very poor upbringing, I decided I wanted to travel. So I traveled for about a decade. And then I was like, okay, now that I'm approaching middle age, I would like to get back into science. So how many here know anything about Shoreline Community College's biotechnology program? Has anybody done the summer outreach program? Yes. So I actually went there and got a certificate as somebody who already has a 4-year degree and cross-trained into biotech. And before I was graduated, I already had a job at AHI, which was a little bit of a stretch because I was taking 22 credits and working 45 hours a week. So my path is the path of someone who didn't know what they wanted to do, smart enough to get scholarships, had an eclectic background. I don't know, did anybody else here grow up without running water? No one? No one? Did you ever have to dig your own outhouse? No one? No one? I did. So I'm the person that can tell you that biotechnology is suitable for anybody of any career background. Even if you don't think you know what you want to do now, you can do it in the future because there's such a need for it. Who here takes Ritalin or any ADHD drug? Who has diabetes? Anyone here? Who is on a regular medication of some sort that they do not need to disclose, they just need to raise your hand if you feel like it? Okay, so probably somebody somewhere is doing biotechnology to produce that. It's not just people with PhDs and masters. You need research associates to actually do the basic research. You need people in biomanufacturing to actually produce the drug. Is anybody familiar with GLP-1? It's basically glucagon-like peptide 1, and it is produced to treat diabetes. In type 1 or type 2 diabetics, it can actually restore pancreatic islet cell function. And it is produced using biomanufacturing techniques. There is currently a worldwide shortage because it works very, very well, not only at that, but at a secondary factor, which is that it can help you lose weight. Ugh, I could use it. But the thing is that there's a shortage of quality control produced GLP-1. People like you, while you're thinking about getting your master's and PhDs, or say you want something like a factory job, you can make it for us. So I don't work in that sector. I work as a research associate at AHI, which does vaccine development. And AHI's full name is Access to Advanced Health Institute, which means we want to provide access to health to people who would not get it ordinarily. And obviously, I'm from that demographic. I grew up in that demographic. I'm still getting dental care that I should have gotten when I was like 12. So it's kind of my mandate too. But we mostly specialize in vaccine and vaccine adjuvant development. So we have clinical trials in South Africa. We study things like AIDS, tuberculosis, chikungunya, yellow fever, SARS, and of course, COVID. Currently, we have several kind of siloed sub-components to our organization. I work mostly with RNA, specifically self-amplifying RNA vaccines. And I also work with mice. So that means that once we get through the in vitro assays, which you have been learning about in your class, We put those vaccines into mice and see how they do. We then at the end collect the serum and then run a bunch of immunoassays, and if the vaccine pans out, we'll put it in a slightly higher order organism. And then if that works out, we'll put it in a slightly higher order organism. And if that works out, then we will make a contract with somebody and get them to develop our vaccine for phase 2 clinical trials. Then hopefully, someday, it will make it into a human in a place where they won't get vaccines if we don't make it. So the advantage of saRNA, just for people who are thinking about what career path they want to go to, and mRNA vaccines is they can be easily lyophilized. We've demonstrated this as a proof of concept at our company. And if they're lyophilized, which basically means a version of freeze drying, it means you can store them without cold storage chains. Now imagine you go to sub-Saharan Africa. Do you think there's a lot of refrigerators? All the time, everywhere? 100% of the time, because the vaccines need to be kept cold if they're not freeze dried or in some way in dry storage, 100% of the time. If they're not, the chain of custody is broken and they'll probably have to be thrown out, which means we can lose vaccines even if we provide them, just because the place that they go to is out of reach. Do you think poor regions of the world have reliable electricity? No. I mean, I'm from Alaska, which is a state in the United States, and I can tell you we don't have reliable electricity. What about if some kind of natural disaster happened to happen while you're in a populated area and there's also an outbreak going? It's not implausible. So say Seattle. How many power outages have we had this winter, right? So that kind of research is funded by grants, by sometimes companies with a lot of money that just want to maybe invest in something that they don't want to necessarily have develop their own organization for. And they fund us to develop these things. So you can do research that is in the private sector. She'll be able to talk about that. You can do research for a university. You can do research for some place like AHI. And you can do it in a way that's producing the drug that will literally probably help save people's lives. You can develop the drug that might literally help save people's lives. And you can do it in a way that literally can be the change that you want to see in the world. That's the end of my talk.
Thank you.
Now, I want to mention, before she starts, that she is the global program director for Novartis. Now, I'm just a research associate. I'm applying to my PhD programs this spring. Yes, I know, in my advanced age. Once again, a reminder that you can do it at any time in your life. Okay? But she has pursued probably a much more conventional path, but that's probably the path that some of you, if you're already in biotechnology at your age, are maybe a little more ambitious, a little more structured, and you might be able to follow her path. So I would listen very carefully.
Unfortunately, I don't think I took a traditional path, but anyway.
More than me.
There'll be an opportunity to ask questions of Pauline after my short set of prepared comments. So we'll have more opportunities to talk about her career path too. So hello, everybody. My name is Joanne Kang. I'm a global program director at Novartis. And what I direct, or the type of programs that I direct, are data science and artificial intelligence. So I just want to tell you very quickly about maybe what Novartis does, and then what I do in my role, which is not a science role, and then talk about my path to get there. So what is Novartis? It's a very large, leading Swiss multinational pharmaceutical company. It employs about 110,000 employees worldwide, with major centers in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Basel, Switzerland, which is where I live, Switzerland. And yes, last year, I think it was, or previous year, they served or reached with their medicines 770 million patients worldwide. And the revenue, in case anybody cares, is in the billions annually. So it's a major player, and the mission is really to provide access to medicines to patients who need them, both in more privileged countries, but also in the places, as Pauline mentioned, where access is limited. The areas of therapy are broad, so cardiology, dermatology. Probably some of you, if I mentioned the major drugs that Novartis produces, you might recognize them. And there are some new kind of emerging areas, which you probably know more about than me, like cell therapy, gene therapy. We're a leader in gene therapy. So these are kind of emerging areas that might be interesting to you. One thing that's become very apparent in the last 10 years and maybe worth noting is the importance of data and the ability to not only collect it and to manage it, but also to analyze it, to leverage it, to create algorithms, to create not only better access to medicines and faster access, because it takes about 10 years from the time that you start in early discovery until a drug reaches you at the pharmacy, but also to drive better operations. Why is that important? In a company which you think, oh, it's just a business, we care about revenue and costs and coming out in the black, because any savings are hopefully passed on not just to stakeholders, but also to the patients. It means that your drugs hopefully can be priced lower. So these are kind of areas where data science and artificial intelligence, when used cleverly, can really help pharmaceutical companies help you. So what's my role? I'm a global director, which means that my area of purview is across the entire Novartis. And I basically help strategize where are those use cases where it makes sense to spend the time and the team to create algorithms and new data systems using artificial intelligence. Would it help to give you an example of some applications, or do you guys already know all about this? Yes.
Definitely give them an example. I want to hear.
Okay, so thanks for your curiosity too. Okay, so do you guys know about the pharma pipeline and the value chain? I don't know if you've covered pharmaceutical industry yet. Okay, so think about kind of a pipe. In the very beginning of the pipe, you need to feed stuff in. And at the end is what's going to come out to the patients at your pharmacy. So it's a long pipe. Typically, right now, it takes 10 years from start to end. At the very beginning, you have scientists, research associates working on what's called early discovery. What are the molecules that could potentially be leveraged to be medicines? And here, artificial intelligence is also being used more and more to identify what they call in silico, so not in vitro, not in vivo, but in silico, very, very quickly generate new candidates for what could potentially work based upon what's known of what works in the body and what the modes of action are. Okay, then once it seems like something could be effective, then obviously they have to check for safety, efficacy, etc. You know more about this than me. And then the pharma companies also take ownership or partner with others to run clinical trials. So these are where you have tests and make sure that in different patient populations the medicine works and is proven to be better than what's already on the market. And then you have to get approval from all of the governing bodies. Like in the US, it's the Federal Drug Administration. And this is also a very long process, lots of paperwork and lots of evidence that needs to be provided to get these approvals. And then eventually with access and negotiation on prices and who gets what with insurance companies, then these drugs can come to the market or these treatments. So that's the long pipeline. And in pretty much at every stage, you can use advanced analytics and sometimes artificial intelligence, but this is becoming more and more sophisticated to optimize that area. So as I mentioned, in early discovery, you can use it to identify new candidate molecules. If you look at the overview, you can also do very large retrospective studies of the data to understand, for my company, where are we too slow? Where can we squeeze the time so that the 10 years that it takes to, to get a very important medicine out can be reduced? And where can we also reach? How can we reach more patients? So, for example, my team has created algorithms that check medical claims data and use advanced algorithms to understand who could benefit from this medicine that we haven't identified already. And so you can always keep track, and then you can see whether whether there are even emerging patient pools that could potentially benefit. So this is kind of a new way of bringing medicines to patients, because it's not just once for all, get a thing to the market until it becomes a generic, and then you don't look at it anymore. But really, it's about reaching more patients who really need the medicine. Another place where we use AI, another team of mine, has also worked in the development phase. So this is when you do have a drug, and now you want to manufacture it and develop it. And here there's also a lot of room in the operations to speed it up, and also to, actually prior to that, also to identify and predict whether a drug will be accepted by the Federal Drug Administration. So these are kind of ways that pharma companies are leveraging data more. Maybe interesting for you, because I'm sure you're a lot more fluent in social media than I am, because I'm older than I look. We're also doing mass analysis, sentiment analysis of social media sentiment. So that means patients are on Reddit or on Twitter or whatever, talking about their side effects, hopefully not anything serious, or talking about how they have X and Y problem and they can't get treatment for it. There is no treatment, and they do this and that, and all of that is processed so that we can understand what are some unmet needs, where are some patient pools that we could reach. Okay, I just said a lot. Maybe you can ask any questions of clarification right now, otherwise you could hold them for later before I jump into my path.
Could I ask a quick question?
Of course, Valerie.
So you actually go into social media and you get the data on this. Have you all moved the direction of development of any medication based on mining the social media data?
No, right now the use case for that is really for products that we already know that we're going to bring. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. Yes.
Is it like web forums from like known patients, or do you just kind of like bookmark anyone who says like, oh, I'm having symptoms of like XYZ on internet or social media platforms?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's more generic, because actually pharma is very tightly regulated, and we may not actually go for patients, even if like identification. We can't identify specific patients. Even if we can, and we know we can, we don't do that. Okay. Yeah. And by the way, I have to say this, especially because it's recorded. I'm here not representing Novartis officially. I'm here purely in my private capacity, so anything I say is not necessarily the view of Novartis.
Ditto.
Yeah. Okay. So what? Maybe do I have time, Rose, to just say quickly about?
Yes, please.
Okay. So what I do day to day as a director, so I have a number of kind of initiatives that I have come up with, of course, with other people's input, and have basically internally raised money to run a project to build some sort of AI or data science, like basically apps for the company, right? For different business users within Novartis. And then I build the teams who need to do this. So can you imagine like what roles are needed to build an app for a big company? Yeah?
You're gonna need probably developer, programmers, like overall like designer. So
Yeah.
you're gonna designer, a couple developers, and then a lot of programmers.
Yes.
Then you're gonna need a base of testers and such to make sure everything works.
Yes, very good. Yeah. And then you've got, in addition to that, you've got your computer scientists who are not the developers of the software, but the AI guys, right? So you've got really talented men and women who can do the algorithms. And then you have data engineers, and like you mentioned about the designers, you've got the user experience designers who do the research to understand how is this going to be used in the best way, and what are the customer needs, and then the UI, right? So cool app, it needs to be cool. And then we have a whole slew, so that's about, per project, I have about 20 to 30 people working on that. We usually get a minimum viable product out for testing within 9 months, which is really fast for such a giant company. And then we have another like 20 people who are like the business stakeholders, right? So I spend about half of my time working with the actual team, like creating the product, and then the other half of my time going around and telling stories about what we're building to make sure that we get funded next year, to give reports to the C-level on, so that's like the CEO or the chief digital officer, on how we're meeting, what we had planned for value, et cetera. So so that's basically what I do. I'm in a lot of meetings. I have distributed teams, so we're on Microsoft Teams a lot. I spend a lot of one-on-one time with each of my team members to make sure everyone's happy, and also coaching them to make sure that they're growing in their role. And we allow, like, it's a cross-functional team, so we allow a bit of crossing over. So sometimes we have data scientists who come over into the design meetings and vice versa. So it's a lot of fun. And I started off as a PhD in physics, actually. And I did that I'm from here. I got my degree in physics and atmospheric sciences at the University of Washington. Did some other stuff for a while, and then moved to Germany and did my PhD in physics there. And I did my research in radiation oncology physics at the German Cancer Research Center. I worked on, you can ask me about this if you prefer, if it's more interesting than pharma. I worked on creating ways to irradiate very complex shaped tumors using proton radiation, which is very, very fine pencil beams to spare normal tissue. And this is really
very
important.
cutting edge, by the way.
Yeah, this is very important, especially for pediatric cases, because you hope that they'll live a long time. So it's very important to spare the spinal cord, etc. So yeah, I did that, and then I went to Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital to do my postdoc, also in the same field. And then I moved, this is where it's sort of unconventional maybe, I moved to transportation. Worked some years as an operations research analyst at the U.S. Department of Transportation, working on simulations of wake vortex, airport capacity optimization, and workforce planning. So, how do you make sure that you have your safety inspectors busy, but not too busy, etc. And then I worked a few years at McKinsey & Company, which is a top management consultancy, working with, by then I was in Germany, so working with a lot of European clients, but also in the US as an expert in advanced analytics. And I did a lot of digital strategy, which is how I ended up kind of at Novartis to help with the digital transformation there. So that's it, and I will now sit down.
Thank you.
Because they're the scariest demographic to give a speech for.
Actually, pulling off, can you also share with us your career pathway?
They did actually hear a little bit about my pathway already, but essentially what I did is I went to Shoreline Community College and started doing their biotechnology certificate, as I told you. They have a pretty comprehensive curriculum. There's a lot of stuff that you guys are doing in your intro biotechnology class that we cover in a lot more depth. And it teaches you the techniques and sort of the trade of doing biotech. Now here's the advantage for you guys. This class that you're taking right now has real world use to you, because when you go to university and you're doing your undergraduate degree and you want to get into a research lab, okay, who's doing anything related to, I'm going to make you raise your hands again, so you're actually going to have to lift your hands. Chemistry, biology, anything in the sciences where you might want to work in a research lab. engineering. Computer science, they might have biological applications like AI, which definitely there's a lot of crossover in the sciences now. So a good 80% of you, right? When you go to apply to your research labs, you want to get in as early as possible, so freshman, sophomore year. But honestly, you know nothing, right? But if you have useful skills, you're much more likely to be able to be brought on early. So this is going to be a huge advantage to you, so don't waste your opportunity with this class. And if you want to pick up a few more classes, you're welcome to go to Shoreline. We do actually have classes available for high school students in biotech and biomanufacturing. Nicely, it's also an employable job. So you can make a decent income with health benefits while you're figuring out what you want to do with your life, still be in the sciences, and be able to transition quickly back into schools. You'll also be making social contacts in the sciences working as an RA. So don't rule it out if you're not sure you know what you want to do. Okay? Do you guys have any questions for me about either my background or what I do now? I do some sexy work. I'm still in the lab a lot, so.
What is like a description of what like an everyday?
So I was specifically hired as an RA that had a very broad training, thanks to Shoreline. So right now, depending on so tomorrow, for example, raise your hand if you're a vegan.
Vegetarian.
Okay. So are you aware of the 3 R's of scientific research with research animals?
Not yet, that comes later in the year.
Okay, so I won't go over it in depth here, but basically AI has a very useful application, which is it reduces the things that we need to test. One of its big abilities is to screen out things that probably won't work. Then we use in vitro assays to eliminate even more options. And then finally, we put it into the least sentient species that we can put it into and try our darndest to do the least amount of harm to that species while we're testing it. But unfortunately, a mouse does not have enough blood for us to run immunoassays without killing it. So we kill them and then we collect the blood. So tomorrow I will be killing mice, to be clear. And that involves collecting their blood in a terminal bleed, taking their spleens, which is usually a reservoir of antibodies. So, and then we will be processing the blood and the spleen in a variety of immunoassays, at least 7 different immunoassays, each of which tells us a different thing. If they concord with one another, we can use that to either justify a larger study or abandon that line of track with a little more investigation. So that's one of the things I do, and that's what I'm going to be doing for the first half of tomorrow. After that, I'm going to be helping to write a research paper on work that we've already done for an earlier vaccine adjuvant, which I cannot tell you about because that's proprietary information, but I'll be writing a report. I will then, after that, be doing something called a PRNT, which is a neutralization assay in which we infect vero cells, which are a type of immortalized cell line, which is basically cancer in a petri dish from a specific part of a human. And if you haven't learned about that, learn about cell culture. Because if you're a vegetarian, you should be supporting both AI elimination and screening processes and in vitro assays. But we're not to the point yet where in vitro assays can be used to justify putting something in a human being. And I think it'll be a very long time before we're ever at that point because human beings are very, very complicated. I will then, the day after that, be doing something called an IVT, which is basically a transcription of a linearized segment of plasmid to turn it into RNA. And so that is a relatively straightforward process, which if anybody wants either the protocol or more information on that, you can get my email after this, okay? I can give it to the teacher, and she will provide it to you if you want.
Perfect.
Also, if you have any more questions for me, you can email me and ask more detailed ones. Then after that tomorrow, this is actually a low period for us. We were so busy from the moment I started until now, and now we have like a 2-month lull where we're setting up for a bunch of projects that are coming down the pipeline, so I'm going to be reading a lot of research papers. Just a piece of advice to you. If you're in a nonprofit organization that is largely funded by grants, make sure your grant writers include the funding for paper purchases. Because right now, I just cold email people. Can I cold email you after this on papers? But I'll be reading a lot of research papers on a variety of topics. Some of that is optimizing assay techniques. Some of that is like the RIG-I pathway, CAR T therapies. There's a couple cell lines that I'm interested in using that might be more applicable for saRNA treatments of tumors, which is something that is developing. I'm also trying to persuade my company into something which probably will not be successful, and I can't talk about it here, but if you email me later, I'll give you a little bit more details. There's one other thing that both Novartis has done, although you guys spun off the company, and many people might be doing with mRNA and siRNA that I want you to consider if you're considering veterinary sciences or agricultural sciences, which is that the same kind of concept that goes into a vaccine can also be used for pesticide development with siRNA and mRNA. There may also be therapeutics that are applicable for, say, dogs, cats, horses, like major agricultural animals. So remember, it's not just humans. We're not the only organisms on the planet. So, any more questions? That kind of answer? There's more. Like, I got hired to do a little bit of all of the techniques, which is what I wanted, because I'm still trying to narrow down my topic for my PhD application and the research labs. That's so hard because my single biggest character flaw is curiosity. I have real trouble like ruling out things that I don't want to learn, which is why I had to travel for 10 years. So, any other questions?
Would that be like bioagriculture, or is there like a better term for that?
I actually don't know if there is a term for that. Do you? No, it's still biotechnology generally speaking, but it has an agricultural focus.
Yeah.
I have a friend that's working in a lab in Oregon right now. She just started her master's, and she's developing RNA-based or pesticides that are specific to the insect that they want to target, so there's no off-site effects. So I wanted to mention that one of the reasons why her photon beam therapy research was so important is that radiation is bad. And you need to have it so that you have the least amount of radiation overspray. Like, you know how we don't get mammograms every single year for women? Because, like, all types of radiation can have cumulative bad effects. And it's completely random. We don't know when it's going to happen, but statistically, more is bad. Photon therapy really reduces the level of radiation and only very, very narrowly targets a tumor, and almost layer by layer. Yeah. So, to go back to your question, a lot of things have broader applications than what you would initially think. So like the techniques themselves can be applied in multiple different fields.
Yeah.
It's still biotechnology, but the end user is different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's important. I remember learning about in apes how like pesticides and herbicides and all of that stuff would create like super bugs because they'd like genetically they'd like evolve past and then they just get stronger and then they become immune to the pesticides that they're using in the first place. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, and a lot of the pesticides that were initially developed, they were kind of broad spectrum. You know, when you push an organism community to the brink, the advantages that weren't initially outweighed by the other survival traits the other members of the community had, now become like the only way you can live. So all of their other disadvantages are like no longer disadvantages, and then all of a sudden you have immunity.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why if you have a vaccine that's been well tested, you should probably take it because the humans are the same way. Humans, chickens, everything. Yep. Any more questions? You can ask questions of either of us.
Yes. Feel free to ask them questions about, what happened to them after high school, how did or just the work that they do, which they've done a great job sharing. But yeah, just any questions you have, feel free.
So you traveled.
I did. Okay,
So tell us, tell how that probably fed into what you ended up doing.
Yes.
Okay.
All kind of learning process.
So my family was very poor. My father worked on the North Slope, so he would be gone for months at a time. And I lived on a homestead that was well out of this town called Fairbanks, Alaska. There's actually a pretty decent engineering university there, but you have to deal with 70 below weather in the middle, so pick your poisons. So I didn't get to travel a lot. I think the one time we did really travel was actually a devastating economic crisis for the oil fields in Alaska, and we traveled because we had to migrant work for 2 years. So we were in a camper in the lower 48, but I was like 4, so. So when I was an adult, my parents owned a restaurant, but they'd both just gotten cancer, so I stayed in my state school. I was a national merit finalist, so it was scholarship. I had stipend. But, you know, they didn't really have the broad quality programs that I was looking for, so I picked the best one that I thought wouldn't drive me crazy, so I became an engineer. I was like, as long as it's a STEM field, I can transition later when I figured out what I want. My parents are still alive, I gotta stay nearby, my brother's a total catastrophe. You know, that kind of factors into your decision making sometimes. So after I graduated, I worked for a few years just to make sure that I was capable of working and had an employment history other than my parents and, you know, the various odd jobs I'd done putting myself through college. But I was still very restless because I was still essentially in the state of Alaska. Lots of adventures, lots of fun, but not really broadening my pitifully narrow horizons, if you know what I mean. So I was married at this time. I talked my husband into buying a sailboat. And then I talked him into letting me take a transfer to Juneau, which is at least further down towards the States. And I lived on a sailboat in Harris Harbor in Juneau and worked as a field engineer, and I got to fly over to a bunch of islands. And I was already doing high Arctic field work before then. And that was great. But my husband was like, I would like to live in the same place as you. Are we living on this 25-foot sailboat in Harris Harbor? And I was like, well, you work 6 months a year. I have proven I can work as an engineer. I don't know what I want to do. Let's travel. So we built a camper. No, wait. My best friend lives in Hong Kong. I should probably list. So we went and visited her, hiked around. I flew all over to like Southeast Asia and a little bit of China, although my language skills do not reflect this because I can basically say like ni hao, and shushu, a couple other things in various languages, but that's about it. And then we built a camper, and I slack packed because my husband does not like backpacking. He has never gone camping with me, and I still want to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. As a matter of fact, right before I went back to school, I was supposed to be hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and the pandemic hit when they closed the entire thing down, and I got fat, so whatever. I slack packed, and then he would just follow along with the camper and pick me up at various locations. And then we went to Hong Kong again, did some more Asia touring. I went on a few backpacking trips by myself during the summer while my husband was working, and then we bought a boat and sailed in Prince William Sound for 3 years.
New boat? New boat?
Used 36-foot Catalina.
Yeah, no, but did you sell the previous one?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so used sailboats are actually pretty cheap, FYI, because they require you to have a lot of skills. But I was raised on the homestead people, and I'm an engineer. I have a lot of skills. So remember, you guys are young. You can still pick up all sorts of weird trades and like hobbies and skills, and YouTube is amazing. Google works. STEM fields allow you a lot more than just a career. So, and then we were on a road trip because it was too dark. So when you're sailing in Prince William Sound, which is very north, it's southern Alaska, but northern everywhere else, the light gets very dim around winter solstice, like gloomy like here, but even darker. And a lot of our anchorages were to be protected from winter storms. A lot of the places that we anchored were like cliff bound. That blocked the water, but it also blocked the light. So I had spec'd and we had installed like a 600-watt solar panel as our bimini on our boat. But the problem is that at around December there was so little light that we weren't even getting solar power. And so I was like, why don't we road trip again? So we road tripped, and then we ran into some other boating friends in Port Townsend. We wound up remodeling a house that was basically a tear down. So now we have property in Port Townsend. And I was like, and now that we are finally out of the state of Alaska and living in some place that I really wanted to live, which was Washington, I want to go back to school. And my husband's like, I knew this day was coming. Footloose and Fancy Free is over, and now she's going to be in school for like the rest of her life, and I guess I'll just watch the dogs. So that's where we're at now. I know that was a long story, but there were a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, well, and now we know how you get from point A to point B.
Yeah, there was a lot of, it was kind of random, but that was kind of the idea, right? Because everything in our life is scripted, and I had been very scripted.
What did you do in high school to prepare for your
I should probably also say I'm wearing hearing aids, so you have to speak up.
what did you do in high school to prepare for your career?
The career that I am currently working on. So I was a National Merit Scholar, but I also came from a background where nobody within 3,000 miles of me had a degree that was in my family tree at all. Like nothing in medical, nothing in sciences, like not even business administration. So I just liked to study, and I was smart. I mean, I wouldn't say that I was like Nobel Prize winning smart, but I was clever. And because I was raised on a homestead, all I ever did was read. I was in total isolation until like 5th grade. So I would say I liked to study, and I didn't resent the idea that you might actually have to do some work to learn something. I was already working in my family's restaurant 40 hours a week by that time, so the idea that like high school was hard was kind of weird to me. Like, it's not that hard compared to actual like using your body to work. Like exercising your brain, you could do that for 40 hours a week. It's still not as tiring as like serving people that don't like you know what I mean? So it is true that if you don't train your mind, you're gonna have to pay with your body. But you don't get paid as well for paying with your body as you do for using your mind. And you can use your mind when you're 90, can't really use your body when you're 90. So let's see, I was also pretty athletic, so I was nationally ranked in Taekwondo. I got a couple gold medals nationally. I lettered in track and field and fencing. My problem is I'm not very good at épée or saber, or épée or foil, because I don't understand the concept of retreat. But encirclement I can do, so I did saber. I worked. I did volunteer work. I got good grades. Took a few college classes. I assumed that if I was bad at something, it wasn't because I was bad at it, it was because I didn't know it yet. Because you are always, no matter how smart you are, you're going to find something that's not necessarily intuitive, or just there are some things you have to learn just by just grinding it out. When you get to Orgo in college, you will find that is very true, right? So I just ground it out. The problem is, though, is I didn't know any of the technical details of applying to a college. I had no idea what costs money or what paperwork you'd have to do, or like the timing for writing your college essays or any of that. So honestly, it might have been a blessing that my parents got cancer, because I probably still wouldn't have written my essays. I wouldn't have known, right? So that's why I recommend taking advantage of the Career Center, because if you don't have that in your family to teach you, you're going to need to get it from somewhere. All those little details of how to navigate a career. You need to find somebody who already knows those little details. Did that answer your question? No.
I'm actually curious about your question, because it's been a long time since I've been in high school, and it seems that having a class like this is very progressive. I'm really impressed that you offer this here at Redmond High. So I don't know if you feel comfortable, but maybe some of you could share kind of what are the things that you think are required for a successful college application or wherever you want to go, because I think it's different than when I was in high school. Back then, we just got good grades. We took the AP courses if we were interested in the topics.
Got a great score on the SATs.
Yeah, I got a good score.
That's the only thing I knew how to do.
And then did some volunteer work in whatever, in musical instruments. Some people did that, but there wasn't more that you could do. Is that different now for you?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Do you have to do a lot more, or is it still the same? Yeah.
I mean, there's something called like generated interest. So you have to like, if you want to go like pre-med, for example, or CS, you probably won't get into the CS major if you don't already have some experience in it before. So,
I see.
You have to prove that you're interested already.
Yeah. Like
which is kind of hard to do when you're, I mean, let's be honest, you guys are babies.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like networking. You like find your way around.
Yep.
And like join clubs.
I see.
That type of thing.
Okay.
I find the most annoying part of that is in this school in this area, it's really hard to get a lot of STEM classes because they're really popular.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't take clubs because just schedule situations. I don't take the bus. I don't have somebody to pick me up.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't take clubs. So my only access is through getting a class, which is really, really hard for certain classes.
So
I mean, I got lucky this year. I got a lot of really cool classes.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
As someone who also did not have transport and obviously had time commitments with work, You may not be able to do it through your high school, but if you work with people within your high school, they may be able to find other options for you outside of that. For example, there are adult versions of the same thing, right? They're not as sort of supported and protected, but you can definitely find some way. I personally, when I was transitioning into the biotechnology program, I pre-gamed by using Coursera. Does anybody know what Coursera is? Yeah. I'm not saying that I'm an advocate for using a paid subscription service, but I use Coursera Plus, and I took a lot of sort of basic classes, not necessarily to finish them, but to sort of get exposure to some of the concepts. You can also supplement a lot with YouTube videos. You can cold call for, say, mentoring opportunities, which you would have to do if you're pre-med anyways, because once you go into pre-med, you're going to need job shadowing with physicians if that's something you're interested in, which is, if they're not in your family tree, pretty hard. You're going to have to learn how to pick up the phone and call people you don't know or send emails to people you don't know. It's a skill, by the way, probably the most valuable skill if you don't have the regular options.
I have a question for Ms. King. So I know you said that you went through like a lot of different fields. Like first you did radiation oncology, and then you came back and then did transportation and then pharmaceutical. So what made you change your career path so much? Like why were you interested in this?
It's a very good question. And most people are confused because they think it's like there are many unrelated things. But I think, first of all, I was pre-med actually, and no offense to anybody who is interested in that, but I became quickly bored with rote memorization and not getting to the root of the matter, and physics explains everything. So I needed something hard and with some things that are still unanswered questions. So for me, it all started with curiosity, and then from there, and finding hard problems. And then from there, I would say that the thread that actually went through all those different, like disparate fields was actually the analytics. So from field to field, I still took the same skill set of computation. So optimization algorithms, and then as it evolved, now we call it data science and AI, but back then it was still the same thing. And so I did that in transportation and logistics, and then in working with many different clients at McKinsey, and then circling back to pharma. But for me, it was always the analytics part. And then along the way,
something else that really carries broadly across every field.
It does. It's kind of
and it's a huge
skill.
feature of biotech, by the way. The analysis of the products is pretty important.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I just have a really quick question. So when you went into, because you went from pre-med to physics, right? And then you went into, you said civil and environmental engineering?
That's me.
Or was that you?
Yeah.
She went into transportation, though, which
Yeah.
is a subset of
Logistics.
civil engineering, actually.
And because I'm interested in civil engineering, but I'm also interested in like physical therapy. I mean, like those are completely separate things, but like
Clearly
how-
not
like,
impossible to jump ship between
like,
those.
but like, how did you, like, would you recommend like if you're interested in one field, like doing that, and then like later down in your life, just like changing, like how did you know? But I don't know how to explain this
Yeah.
question.
I think I understand. Is it that you've got these very seemingly disparate interests
Yeah.
right now, and how did I and I seem to have something similar, so how did I manage like kind of covering them or exploring them? Okay, so it's a really good question, and maybe not applicable to everybody, but there are some people who kind of have potential, not only interest, but also skills and great passion in multiple fields that seem unrelated. So if this speaks to you, like I suffered through it, I'm happy to talk to you more about it offline. It's kind of like my answer to your question too, it was similar, is that I just had to be self-aware about what skills I had at the moment and what I could make happen very quickly. Not very quickly, but expeditiously, and follow that until I felt like, okay, either there's another opportunity or this doesn't feel right anymore. And then you pick up stuff and you look for opportunities. So My advice to you, which grade are you in? Are you a sophomore?
Senior.
You're a senior
Yeah.
already? Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No
yeah.
pressure.
Okay, so you still have time, unless you go directly to a technical school, you have time to explore for a bit and kind of feel it out and start one place.
Yeah.
And don't spread yourself too thin is what I would
Okay.
advise. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you
Thank
guys.
you so much.